Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you very much for joining us at 01 Day Creators Talk. It's a great pleasure to meet you all. Today we will talk about biophilia in practice. And before we kickstart the program, I would like to briefly talk about the objective of today's talk and introduce the speakers. 01 is attempting to go global. With S01, with that name, we want to go to Singapore. So today we have with us Mr. Kevin Lim. We have today 5 creators that we are working together on a project. And Mr. Kevin Lim pursues many eco-friendly and sustainable architectural projects. So I very much look forward to his presentation. And S01 also wants to focus on CSR. To that end, we plan to work with CSR companies and H1G1 together with Jongkyu Foundation and Hyundai Motors. We want to identify some of the potential companies with high potential, and we want to pursue our collaboration with them. And together with H1 Dream, we have sort of organized today's session, and we have with us Mr. Kim Jongkyu, and from On Dream, we also have with us Mr. Park Sangwook, who will moderate the session. So under the theme of biophilia in practice, the 3 speakers will provide us with insightful presentations. So please stay tuned. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kevin, and I'm from Singapore. I run studio SKLIM, SKLIM, and we're glad to be here, to be invited by Hyundai for this 01 festival. So, do all you know what is sustainable design per se? Does anyone know in that sense? So, sustainable design is not just about planting trees or making it more ecological friendly. Sustainable design involves many, many parts. And today I'll show you 3 examples of how we managed to achieve sustainable design in our projects. Right, so these 3 projects, the first one, we designed sustainable schools for developing cities. We are currently doing a project in India for the past 6 years, and we have been exposed to various practices over there. And each of these practices are also sustainable in nature, and I'll run you through the whole process of what is passive sustainable design. The second case example, I'll talk about one of our research into materials, how we use plant fibers to create biocomposites. And the third example is I'm going to show you guys how sustainable projects can evolve from a bottom-up situation. So you don't need big corporations per se to tell you, or governments to tell you what to do. What we did was like-minded people came together and we got the resources to do a sustainable project as a form of education. So this is a modern high international school in India. What we do is we're trying to reach out, we're trying to pursue passive architectural design. The second part is we also try to reach Indian Green Building Council, different levels of green building marks per se. So at the moment, we are poised to reach the highest green mark for buildings. I will bring you through the whole process of how this building itself shows a passive, sustainable design. Right, so in a building itself, what we are usually concerned about is the envelope control. Envelope control meaning what does the outer skin, how does it deal with the fabric per se? in order to make something which is sustainable, we had to look at the site itself. And we had to see what we could potentially, how do we position the building. So as you can see here, this was from the computer rendering maybe 4 years ago. And this is how it is in real life. And we are pretty proud to do this, be able to do this in India, because we are talking about a country that might not have all the advanced equipment to do something so complicated. So I'll also bring you through the whole process that sustainable designs can be for everyone, not just for advanced countries. In a normal project, we try to position the building. And what you have here is basically a rectangular plot, right? You have all your different government controls and government regulations. And that creates the whole envelope. So it tells you how tall your building is, how much you can build, right? How many floors, can you do a basement? And what we tried to do was first create a box. And then we began to carve out spaces within the box. So as you can see from some of these drawings, there is a lot of blank spaces or canyons per se that actually let in light into the building. So before we start on the project itself, we have to orientate the building the right way. We have to study where the sun angles are coming from during summer, winter, autumn, right? And then your building is maximized to allow maximum light into the building. What is the implication of that is that you reduce your internal lighting fixtures, and in that sense, you are more sustainable because you cut down your electric bills. Throughout the whole process, we went through different design iterations. So we made models as well as computer modeling to find out what is the best form. So for example, whether the building is going to be a square, whether the building is going to be a circle, we begin to study that with solar simulation throughout the whole year. So these are two examples where you begin to see that we use sunlight analysis to analyze which form is the best for the building, meaning which form is able to have more, reduce the temperature in the internal spaces. So from all these models, we begin to pick out the ones that actually make sense. So it's not just about design, but also about how it conforms to the environment. We managed to have 3 skylights. All the openings are maximized towards the sunlight throughout the whole year. And we try to have as much greenery as possible within the building itself. But as we know, this is an urban site. It's also very difficult to have green gardens and all that. Each floor plate is actually very different. So we don't have the same floor plate repeating in a way. So when we talk about the facade design, which is the outer skin of the building, we have to see which configuration or which design that's in the most light into the building, because these are classrooms, right? So in that sense, the openings and how wide they are, how high they are, everything is regulated. And everything has to be designed from a very small scale, from a small scale starting point. From then on, we began to look at how the openings react to the different streets and react to the different urban scenarios. So what was very different that we found out was that in India, it's not advisable to have spaces that are open to the road, because the noise from the road is very noisy, and that will affect the classes as well. And there's a lot of air pollution. So although we carve out the spaces, we also shield them with glass so that we keep a kind of internal environment where teachers are able to teach the kids without shouting. In all, we had 3 types of panels for the school. And for each panel, because of the size variations, each panel is a bit different. So in terms of this fabrication, we found out that it's also very important to tell the workers in the most simplest way, how do we construct this complicated facade? So it's not just telling them the drawings per se, but telling them the relationship between each other. And then with that, they are able to start from something very simple to build something very complicated. So as you can see from here, the skylights actually help to really brighten up the building. And that, in that sense, you cut down on your light levels. This is how it is now. The facade itself with all the panels. So the panels are all actually very small and joined together like a jigsaw per se. What you see here in the center is a giant void area where the kids can gather. This was the area where we begin to carve out spaces within the facade itself. So some of the spaces are 3 to 4 stories volumetrically high, and you can look down from all the way from the top. This is what it will be when it's completed. So in a sense, we created an outdoor classroom, which is indoor as well. And we tried to use local herbs. So for example, I'm not sure if you guys know about Ayurvedic herbs, which is very indigenous to the Indian culture. So these plants have medicinal value in a sense. So having sustainable flora and fauna is not just about importing foreign species into your country. You have to look at what's available locally and how does that bring value to the community as well. This is what it is now. Right, so the second project what I want to talk about is there's also another side to sustainability, which our studio was able to explore in the last year. That means going down to the product level and saying, how can we influence change by making more sustainable building materials? Because the world's carbon emission, 39%, the construction industry is responsible for that. So that is a huge percentage. And if we don't start to use sustainable materials, we are all contributing to this global warming. So the second project, what we have tried to do was to use Kenneth plant fibers. So Kenneth plant fibers are something like this. They're from the Kenneth plant. And what we do is we use them to create biocomposites like this, right? So what you see in the background, these are Kenneth plants, which are the tropical version of hemp, which is prevalent in North America. So the biocomposite market is actually flourishing in Asia Pacific. In areas China, Korea also does it, Japan, Malaysia. And the biocomposites market in terms of the value is almost set to double by 2026. So there is a lot of potential in using using plant fibers as an alternative resource to synthetics or plastic material. These are showing some of the processes of how we make the biocomposites. So we do use vacuum. We use, it's a very artisanal way. It's all done by hand. And what we tried to also experiment was we tried to use natural fibers, natural dyes. So this is using a turmeric dye. We're not using dyes that are harmful to the environment. And with that, we are able to cast different shapes for internal usage. And you can also see we did this in a cafe because we found that it emits a very nice glow, and we use it as a light fixture in a cafe in Singapore. And further on, in our third project, we'll talk about this. We made them into roof elements. So not just the skylight, but also eave shingles that surround a pavilion. So the third the third way we can all be doing sustainable design in that sense is that it can come from the bottom-up initiative. So, as I said before, we don't need the government to instruct us what to do or corporations to tell us what to do. So, we were given this, I think we had like-minded people coming together, started with 4 of us, and we collaborated and we made the project. We got big companies involved slowly, and then we got the Swiss Embassy of Singapore involved. So we wanted to do a sustainable pavilion in Marina Barrage in Singapore to showcase and to educate people about sustainable construction. And from this project, the main structure itself was using glue laminated structure, which is timber panels joined together with glue. And the structure was constructed in Switzerland with a 5-axis CNC, and that was shipped to Singapore, and that was constructed in Singapore within a few days. So everything was dry construction. So these were all the companies that were involved in the project itself. So it started with the 4 of us, Herring, my office, Deloitte, and Affordable Abodes. And then we started to talk to various agencies. So we started to talk to the Swiss Embassy. We managed to get Swiss companies involved. Slowly, even like UBS, government entities such as Public Utilities Department in Singapore started to get involved. Swiss companies like Vitra, EHL Campus, we slowly had to present to them and get them on board with this project, because how do we fund the project per se? There was no available funds for this project, but we wanted to do it, right? So this pavilion was designed to be modular and efficient for construction. And what we present there is just a particular module, and that can be proliferated to form a whole like tapestry, a covered walkway. And why is this sustainable? Because when you're able to multiply the module, you also save on wastage, because you only have one type, and you can repeat that easily, right? So various parts of the components, later I'll explain itself. These are all the various components coming together, different companies. So the main structure itself was glue laminated structures. The base itself was a metal framework, and then we used recycled panels. We collaborated with furniture companies and used local materials such as rattan to bring forth the idea that sustainability appeals also to all ages per se. So from the very young to school-going people to adults. So what is efficient construction? What you see at the base there is like a Lego of parts. These metal panels are all prefabricated. So there's no welding on site. You join them by bolts. Why is that sustainable? It's because you're able to reuse them at the end of the day. Take out the bolts and they can be used for another project. So you don't have to produce the material again. Efficient construction is also about minimizing the amount of wet works that you have. So what you see here, those are called glued-in rods. That means all these are all prefabricated by robotics, and on site, we just have to insert them and screw on. It's very simple. So the labor itself, if you understand the labor situation in Singapore, is, I think not all labor is at a very high level. So we do have a lot of foreign workers from Indonesia, from India, from Bangladesh, from China. And how do we communicate all these ideas of construction to them? It has to be very simple. So that was what we learned in India as well, that your instruction manual cannot be as complicated as, I mean, it has to be like your IKEA models and your Lego manuals as well. Like A joins to B, and then C can join to D or something like that. So we have to have that kind of philosophy in terms of construction. The whole structure we tested out in Switzerland to receive different loads. This was in process. with our second project, you saw that we created all these canopy shingles. So these, besides being just decorative, they also help to channel the rainwater away from the pavilion itself so it doesn't flow back in. This was the final iteration. And sustainable design is also a lot of hard work. So this was, we had to find recycled panels which were thrown away. And in the midst of all these piles, actually we found a few snakes as well. So sustainable design is not just glamorous and very clean. We have to find the materials itself. And we have to find the sources of people who are willing to give them to you. So we use these to form the decking of the pavilion, as you can see over there. We worked with the famous Swiss company Vitra to hack their furniture. So we gave a new interpretation to the furniture by using local arts like rattan to modify the furniture. So these actually appeal a lot to the kids, and we got the kids to be involved and to understand what is the whole process of sustainability in architecture. So once it was moved from Marina Barrage, we had to move to a permanent place. And the design was meant to be used for second usage. So that in itself is also a very sustainable approach, because you don't just produce a pavilion for, let's say one purpose. Can you use it for another purpose? Can it be dismantled, moved away, brought to another place, and erected again? So creating through collaboration, although there were many, many parties involved, I think we also managed to have a very flat organization, and everyone kind of understands each person's role. So we had workshops at EHL campus. We had meetings with the various partners, talking to the people who are doing the construction. And after the pavilion was completed, we began to give talks as well. So talks like this, we wanted to educate the public. We wanted to reach out to non-government agencies. So we invited the public to take part in this whole process. We also conducted tours for various agencies to explain to them. Right, so we're also we are glad to be part of Hyundai's 01 Creator Program for the pilot Singapore program. And our research in that sense, we are doing something quite similar to all our recent research so far. We are looking at how we can have low high tech. What do I mean by low high tech? That means if we look at primitive materials, how can we use them to future-proof so they can be relevant and be used in modern day life? So as I explained earlier on, like we have been going to India for the past 6 years, and every day when we start to look at the daily life. So for example, this is a terracotta cup. So if you go to the street and you have a hot piping tea, they serve you in one of these terracotta cups. And these are then thrown away, but they are recycled because they are mixed with water, and then they make these terracotta cups again, right? And if you go to the street and if you buy a snack or something, they serve you in these. These are made from sour leaves. They have been pressed by pressure to form containers. And these are thrown away again. And because they are leaves by itself, their usage, they can easily be biodegradable, right? The last slide, as you can see, that is using rattan. And we had worked with rattan, which is prevalent in Southeast Asia, to create light fixtures, to create installations. So one of our research, we are trying to use canner fiber biocomposites to upgrade them with solar panels. So we are looking at how these can be further integrated with solar panels so that they can be used not just for developed economies, but also start off from less developed economies. Because if you have this as a roof system, and if this is able to generate solar power by itself, and it's an integrated system, then this is also makes it a more viable material. The second material influence from what we have experienced in the streets of India was how can we use this as a cooling partition. So we wanted to combine this with evaporative cooling as well as plant systems, because this material itself is able to dissipate the heat efficiently per se, and that reduces air condition. So what could we do with all this? At this point in time, I think we have an agenda, and there are certain materials that we want to show, but we also think that the materials that we investigate are able to feed back into the car industry as well. So for example, there might be a day where you might not need air conditioning in your cars. You might have a whole panel made of terracotta panels with evaporative cooling, so when even the car moves forward, you have a natural air condition per se. So we are thinking about how can we actually merge the vehicular environment with the built environment, because that, in that sense, in our modern day and age, is much, much more integrated. We have energy being used for homes, being used in electric vehicles, but that the realm of the car versus the realm of the built environment might be further merged with sustainable materials. Right, so thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I ask a question right away, or should we wait for the Q&A session? Because I would like to ask a question right away for the audience. Yes, thank you very much for the insightful presentation. I was impressed to see the many projects that you undertook. And as an architect, well, you not only talked about the architectural design, but also the different materials, as well as the process of making a building and also recycling of the materials. So I was very impressed to see the case. But first and foremost, you talked about India's modern high school case. And I have a question about that case. You said about the environmental simulation that you undertook to decide on the form or about the facade. So in determining the facade, you did some environmental research and you conducted some analysis, and I was quite interested in that process. But in your presentation, I could not see any details, so could you please elaborate on the process itself and the simulation that you undertook? So, for instance, in India, for instance, I'm sure that they have some local specific environment. And how was that applied and considered when you actually undertook the project?
Right. Thank you for that question. So you can, as you can see, when we were trying to find the form of the building itself, it's not just about design of what the team wants to do. Is it going to be a circle? Is it going to be a rectangular shape? We needed to come up with different variations. And what you see in that center slide over there, the colors actually show something. So we took the climatic data of India throughout the whole year. So from winter to summer to autumn, we begin to study the kinds of heat that the building is able to receive, in a sense, so solar radiation. So areas that you see in blue are areas that are very cool, per se. And this is done just by changing the shape of the building, or we call it the building morphology. So the building morphology itself, we are able to say if we shape it a certain way, does that help to create more spaces that are more conducive for the environment, right? And with that process, there is then that human element that we begin to decide, like which might be the best shape for the building. So you see with all the small models over there, we actually bring them to our client in India. And then our clients can participate in that whole design process. So it might be just as simple as whether I like the shape or I do not, but once they see the climatic data, they also begin to understand that that is best for the building itself. It's not just based on aesthetics, but it's also based on what people, the science, what science shows, which is all these simulations and all these data. And I think through that whole process, we begin to then further shape the building much more in detail. We begin to say, how we're going to allow the light coming through, and all of that is also related to some kind of lux level calculation. So there's certain lux level calculation that's conducive for classrooms, office buildings. Each function has a different value system. And then through that, we run simulations with artificial lighting, natural lighting, and that helps to shape how the windows are being placed, right? Of course, there are a lot of factors as well, like privacy and what you want to see, what you not want to see, the whole street noise. So there's a lot of climatic as well as cultural and social data that we take into account, right?
되게 답변도 잘 해주셔서
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. I have one more question.
캐납 벤트
You talked about the Canaf
만들었던 지금 저
biocomposite material, and you showed us
제품 같은 경우에
the product.
굉장히 흥미롭습니다. 일단
Well, that
저희가
was quite
아까 이제
impressive
마지막에 말씀하셨던 로우
because
하이텍이라고
you
하는
talked about the low high tech
굉장히
concept,
기술 집약적인
which is
것도
very
좋지만 그 sustainability
technology
위해서
intensive.
그 원초적인
However, but at the same time, we also need to pursue
원초적인 그
biophilia,
재료의 구성에서부터
biophilic design to be
어떻게
sustainable.
생산되고
So
컴포되고
where
다시
does
자연으로
this come
돌아가는지에
from,
대한
and
조금 되게
how does
좋은
it
사례인 것
end
같은데,
in our nature? So you can see the entire cycle. And given the concept of sustainability from the perspective of low high tech,
어떻게 생각하시는지
I would like to know more about your perspective about low high tech and that role in our society.
Right. So, so there's a difference between sustainability in developed countries and less developed countries. So, for example, I consider Singapore a developed country, and sustainability, of course, is pursued differently in Korea and Singapore versus in India. So what we found out through our trips through less developed countries is that sustainability is a way of life over there. Whereas sustainability is a kind of a privilege or something good to have in developed countries. So what's the difference is that because of resources and, of course, economic situations, when you do not have the resources, you resort to finding a solution by yourself. And that might be the cheapest solution, and that is, in that sense, by default, sustainable, right? You don't see this, I don't think I've seen this in Korea. We use single plastics, even in Singapore, we just throw them away. But then your plastics take very long to biodegrade in that sense. And I'm not saying that we go back to caveman age and say, let's throw all the technology away. And let's use stones, let's use fire, let's use plant fibers for everything. I think we have to see what materials that we have now and how can we slowly replace them. So for example, I think research into plant and organic materials, for example, like bamboo, jute, or even food waste from banana fibers, from pineapple fibers. Slowly, they have been made into textiles. They've been made into biocomposites material. Even we managed to work with a company in Singapore that converts coffee waste into boards for construction. Right, so your coffee beans, after the waste, the powder is all thrown away, and a company picks them up and remix them into boards. So I'm not saying I think there has to be a progression where we start to look at materials and say, how can we be more environmentally conscious in a sense, right? We're not trying to go from 1 to 10 on a sustainable scale overnight. But if we can make that move, like say 10, 20%, 30%, and then with technology, we are able to improve the material per se, right? And then how can this material be applicable to modern day in life? So of course, modern day in life, we need technology. We need to be connected. We need to think about clean energy and renewable resources. But how do we use the primitive material to create a new version or a future for the, a primitive future for us? How do we begin to coexist with what we had before, right? And how can that change the life that we have now or for the future? Yeah.
답변 너무 감사하고 사실 이제
Yes,
로봇과
thank you
관련된
very
그
much for that
Ancient
answer.
Future라고 하는 오래된
And
미래라는 책이
Ancient
아마
Future
말씀
is an
주셨던
old
거랑 굉장히
book
비슷한 내용을
that
있어서
kind of resonates with me at this moment.
그러면 다음으로
Now I would like to move on to Mr. Kim Jong-yu's presentation, who will talk about climate change and the use of sustainable energy. And Mr. Kim is from 60 Hertz. The floor is yours.
안녕하세요. 이 자리에서 그리고 온라인으로 바쁘신
Hello,
와중에,
everyone.
이 자리에 참석해
Thank you very
주셔서
much
감사드립니다.
for taking part in
앞서서
today's session,
케빈께서
both
다양한
online and
신화적인
offline.
그런 물질들을
So Kevin just
창의력을
mentioned
더해서
about
어떻게
how we
활용하고
can
있는지
leverage
소개시켜
sustainable
주셨는데
materials
저는
with a bit
오늘
of
에너지에
creativity.
대한 이야기를
Today I'm
하려고
going to focus my talk on energy.
아까 싱가포르와 마찬가지로
Just
한국도
like in Singapore,
발전된 나라라고 생각합니다.
I believe
발전된
also
나라는
Korea is a developed nation, and for a developed nation or a country, sustainability is something that's good to have, but it's also a matter of big responsibility. So today I'm going to talk about climate crisis and why renewable energy's use is important and what we need to scale up renewable energy. So I'm a fellow of On Dream H, and I am running 60 Hertz, which was also funded by ZER01. Let me first talk about a scale up of renewable energy. So if you look at the statistics of where the greenhouse gas comes from, a lot comes from the energy industry. So in the middle is Korea. On the left is Korea, on the middle is US, and on the right is Europe. And you can see that a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions come from the energy sector, and that is why we need to seek energy transition. Without energy transition, we cannot respond to climate change effectively. So in this situation, the portion of renewable energy is very low, even compared to OECD average and even compared to world average. On the other hand, when it comes to the use of renewable energy and our needs, so when it comes to the requirement or demand for renewable energy use, it's very high. There are lots of manufacturers in Korea, and if they don't use renewable energy, they can have their export competitiveness undermined. That is why, going forward, the energy mix of renewable energy is 2.4, but it's going to actually, it needs to raise the portion up to OECD average level in the future. So renewable energy is getting cheaper and cheaper. There is the Moore's law in the semiconductor where the level of integration increases by twofold every 2 years. And in the PV sector, there is the Swanson's theory, which says that the cost of PV cells falls by 20% with doubling of global manufacturing capacity. So this theory has been put in place for the past 15 years, and this states that the renewable energy will become cheaper and cheaper. This is the statistics of 2019. If you look at the green box, it refers to the LCOE of the fossil fuel. And in the middle, there is the PV, and now it's like 2022 right now. And you can see that the grid parity has been almost reached, and that is also the case in Korea. And there are some arguments made in the academic circles that that's also the case in Korea. So by 2040, half of the overall generation will be done by renewable energy, is what about the X3, and also there is RE100. There are campaigns where a lot of companies are joining. In Korea, Hyundai, Samsung, LG, and SK are joining the RE100 program, declaring their commitment to use renewables. And these are the logos of the companies that have announced that they will go 100% renewables. That includes Fortune 500, but also major large conglomerates, so companies that we know. So if I elaborate further on Korea, so this is the statistics from the Power Exchange. So 80% of the renewables project in Korea is mid to small size. And that is why, in order to expand the renewable energy, there are some specific challenges that we need to address. And of course, if you look at the breakdown of the cost of renewable projects, the patterns are different when it comes to the size of the project. As you may well know, panels and inverters, so which are the hardwares of the renewable energy manufacturing, the hardware cost has gone down. So if you look at the red box, it has actually been halved. But if you look at what's indicated in yellow, that is the soft cost of the hardware or the non-hardware costs, you can see that they're not going down. For example, that is to acquire customer, licensing, and costs associated with transportation and O&M and administration. So going forward, countries like Korea with limited territory and with a lot of restrictions, in order for us to expand renewables, we need to be able to bring down our costs and technology that can bring down the non-hardware costs or soft costs. That is why IT is required in order to boost efficiency. These kind of efforts need to be made. Now I'm going to talk about management of renewables. I don't know if you've read this article. So this is what's happening in the island of Jeju. There's been a lot of suspension of the wind generation. So 70% of the times the wind power plants or wind parks were suspended. And some may wonder, renewables, once you construct these relevant facilities, you don't need fuel costs and they don't emit gases. So, it should be available all the time and it should be operational all the time. But why do we have to stop the operations of these generators? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our grid. So a grid is stable when the supply and demand meet. So if you look at the adapters, they're 260 hertz and so forth. And all the electrical appliances need to meet these specifications. So if there is a disequilibrium between supply and demand, the frequency might change. And because of this frequency change, it can have an impact on the appliances itself, but that can also lead to a nationwide blackout. And that is why we need to have this balance between supply and demand to ensure the stability of the grid. But as I said before, when it comes to renewables, and as the renewables need to be scaled up, and we have to also ensure the stability of the grid, and that actually leaves us with a lot of challenges. First of all, on the left, you can see that the renewables actually has a rapid change in terms of generation quantity depending on the weather. So it is very important to keep a stable balance between demand and supply, but that is very difficult. And in the nuclear power and also fossil fuel, there were lots of large power plants that were operated, but for the renewables, there are lots of small-scale distributed generators, and we need a technology that allows us to actually manage a large network of distributed generators. And that is why there is the concept of virtual power plant that is emerged. So this is to actually refers to all of the technologies and services that allows us to actually generate small-scale distributed resources, and that can actually be applied to houses, electrical vehicles, and power plants. But the future is not that bleak. So I spent about 3 years in Europe in 2013, and what happened back then was there was an eclipse. And when it comes to eclipse from the energy perspective, it's actually referring to one big PV plant going on, going off. off. And you can see that the renewable portion in Europe is very high out of this energy mix, and yet they did not see any blackouts. So going forward, if we are to see scaled up renewable energy resources in order to ensure the stability of the power grid, we need a lot of IT assistance and help and developments. And that is why regarding the management of grid, I think that there are two paradigms in addressing the complexity. So first is to go for a cathedral model, and one is to go for a bazaar model. And in the past, our energy market was based on a cathedral model, but going forward, a lot of startups will emerge in the market to work towards to ensure the stability of the grid, and the collaborative approach should be the key. Especially in Korea, together with the renewable development, we also developed e-vehicles. So we need to make sure that the sustainable energy and electric cars are combined in a harmonized manner. And not only the e-vehicles, but solar panels and battery systems. So we are indeed a leader in this field. So that is why Elon Musk also complimented Hyundai, saying that Hyundai is doing pretty well. So based on this hardware infrastructure, we have to develop services. And if that happens, not only Korea can play a leading role in our domestic nation market, but also around the world. Now, let me talk about the trading of renewable energy, which might not be very familiar to you. There are 4 different approaches. First of all, it's to actually issue certificates based on the quantity of renewables that are produced. So you can actually buy the RECs. And the second is PPA, power purchase agreements. So it is actually the renewable power plants and also the companies signing a long-term contract. And the second is green premium. And fourth is production for self-consumption in developing its own wind generator or PV generator. But when funding or sourcing renewable energy, the preference is a little bit different according to different countries. If you consume a lot of energy, they would go for self-consumption. And if you're consuming less energy, for example, IT companies, they would prefer to buy RECs. And that is why in Korea, a lot of companies, in order to expand their renewables, we have to be able to meet different needs of different companies and develop institutions that cater to their needs. And the institution should not just focus on one specific industry, which will give rise to a lot of questions. Then what kind of companies are consuming renewables fast? So according to statistics, it is the companies that are engaged in B2C business, and also where the electricity utility cost is a little bit low in their product cost. So in Korea as well, if you look at the first cases, it's usually the cosmetics company that take the lead. And once you commit to use the renewable energy, you can see that the IT companies tend to increase their shares very rapidly. So Naver actually announced that they would join RE100 program. And going forward, the IT companies will rapidly increase their use of renewables. Another issue is about the right to choose renewable energy by individuals. As for companies, in the past it was not possible, but because of export competitiveness, a lot of companies can benefit from institutions to selectively use renewable energy. But as for individuals, they don't have a lot of option like this. When I used to live in Germany, I selectively purchased renewable energy to pay my utility fees. But in Korea nowadays, it's not possible. Of course, we may think that this is something natural that we should be able to experience, but that is not the case overseas. So, for example, as we selectively purchase organic farming produce, we should be able to selectively use renewable energy. If I make an analogy, for example, there is agricultural produce that has pesticides and that didn't use pesticides, and all of these produce are mixed together and it's provided to the consumers. But we should be able to cater more to the needs of the consumers, and that is why we need to develop further institutions. Now I'm going to talk about what we're doing in terms of expanding the use of renewables and the trade of renewables. 60 Harris has been established established 2 years ago. And last year, we got the award from the Ministry of SMEs and Startup, and also from the Prime Minister, and also 2 times from the Minister, and including Hyundai Motors and other large companies, we are working on a collaborative project. So to expand renewables, we developed a renewable energy map. So this is to actually manage or to connect 80,000 PVSs that are widely spread in Korea. So on the right, there are all of these company logos. About 1,200 companies have joined our service, and if you use this service, you can actually know how many PVS are in your neighborhood and how much electricity that they are generating. The second is renewable energy management system. The image that you're seeing is a gas station, and going forward with a number of increasing EVs, you also have to think about charging these EVs. So the software that we developed is to actually transition the existing fossil fuel-based gas into a combined fuel gas station. So if you use the energy management system that we developed, you can actually combine different components to increase your operational efficiency. And last but not least, I would like to talk about the trading of renewable energy and what we're doing. Actually, the renewable energies are mostly used by companies, and especially difficult for small companies and also individuals. So we are providing monthly subscription service for renewable energy. Especially, we are collaborating with the citizen production energy cooperatives so that the energy produced by citizens can be used by different companies. I'd like to wrap up my presentation. Thank you for listening.
예, 정말 흥미로운 주제.
Yes, that was a very interesting topic.
일단 저희가 친환경 혹은 뭐 지속 가능성에 대해서 얘기하다 보면
When we talk about sustainability and green environment, we talk a lot about energy. And that is why renewable energy has become a must, essential for us. But when it comes to efficiency of renewables, there are still challenges that remain to be addressed. And we have to take into consideration the management aspects as well as the distribution and the economic viability of renewable energy. And I think that was quite interesting from the presentation. So I was reading through the presentation, and what I realized was that compared to Europe and other continents or regions, Korea has a very small percentage or portion of renewable use. And in that sense, I would like to know what are the factors for that. I would like to know your take on this. There could be many different factors, but I would like to focus my remarks on the factors related with the companies like ours and the market. As I explained in the statistics, just as much the hardware cost is going down, but the non-hardware cost is not going down. Actually, in Korea, the territory is very limited, and there are lots of renewable energy projects that take place in a limited amount of space, and a lot of projects involving green buildings. But in these small-scale projects, the hardware cost represents only about half of the budget. So let me give you an example of food delivery. There is a new food delivery service, and the customer acquisition cost has gone down. So a lot of things under the name of O2O are connected with IT, and they are leading to a lot of innovative cases. But in the energy sector, we don't see a lot of these best practices, and all of these attempts should be connected with the energy sector so that the non-hardware costs can be drastically reduced. These kind of efforts are needed for us to scale up renewable energy in Korea. Thank you very much for that answer.
또 이렇게 재생에너지를 이야기하다 보면 이제
When we talk about renewable energy,
바람이나 뭐 햇빛이나
so
이게
including
어떻게 보면 자연으로부터
wind
공짜로 얻을 수 있는
and solar
에너지인데
energy,
아까
something that we can get
풍력에
freely
대해서
from
말씀해 주셨듯이
nature.
어떤
But as you mentioned
하는
about the wind power,
분일화되는 그 퍼센티지가 그 측정 이 균형을 잡지 못하면
And if the supply and demand actually fails to stabilize or to be balanced, then there are issues of curtailment that occur. And that is why management issue is also very important. So in that sense, recently with the typhoons and with extreme weather conditions,
재생에너지
we experienced the suspension of generation of renewable energy, and it is very difficult to predict and forecast the future of renewable energy, and thus your company's 60 Hz rule is very important. So we're seeing a lot of climatic changes, including the melting of the ice in Arctic region. So against this situation, can you share with us about the direction of your company and your commitment to sustainability going forward?
네, 뭐 저희가 기후가 어떻게 변할 것인지를
Of course, we
사실
cannot really
예상하기는
forecast and
굉장히
predict
어려운데
how the climate
일단
will unfold in the
산업의
future.
관점에서
But
실제
from an industry's
기후에
perspective,
대한
what I'd like to
분석이
say is
필요한
that we
그런 에너지
need
관련된 것을 한 가지 말씀을 드리면
I'd like to talk about energy-related issue that requires the analysis of climate. Actually, the RE100 program of exporting companies is very much related with the climate because they are usually engaged in long-term projects or long-term contracts. And actually, in 10 years' time and 20 years' time, we should be able to know how the renewables production would be based on a very long-term outlook. So big companies like Hyundai, they have a large amount of money to be used for funding renewables. So that is why they're very much interested in the long-term vision, and they need to have that kind of long-term vision to be able to make the right calculation. Actually, it's been recent that the RE100 was introduced in Korea, but there are not many companies that can really look towards the future and make their plans, and that is why we're developing relevant software. And regarding the climate, we are working with the climate situation agency to use our software in making predictions for the future. And the project is currently underway. Thank you for your answer.
이렇게 크리에이터들과 토큰 이 정도로 하고
So we would like to now
Q&A를 몇 개 받아보려고 하는데
move on to the Q&A session.
질문이 있으시면
And does anyone have any questions or comments?
부탁드리겠습니다. 예, 거의 질문.
Yes, I think we have a question.
궁금한 게
Yes.
재생에너지를
When it comes to renewable energy, to produce renewable energy, we also need hardware to make that possible. As for solar energy, we need many solar panels. But then in 20, 30 years, they will go old.
그럼 그거에 대해서는 어떤 식으로
And then
대비를 하고 있는
how are we preparing for that?
네, 그 태양광 패널을 만드는데 활용되는 그런 소재들의
The materials used to develop PV panels or solar panels,
소재들의 90% 이상이
so 90% of those materials are recycled.
태양광만 그런 게 아니라
Not only for PV panels, but also battery, the recycling rate is very high. So if you look at what CTO of Tesla did after he retired, you may not know his company, but he founded a company
무슨 일을 하는 회사냐면 배터리 재활용 회사입니다.
in battery recycling.
재생에너지 분야에서
So
쓰이는
as
주요
such,
하드웨어는
the
재활용에 대한 시장이
key
굉장히
hardwares
빠르고
that are
크게
used in their
성장하고 있어요.
renewables
왜냐하면
are
재활용이 잘 되기
increasing
때문에.
rapidly in terms of market and size, and that's because the recycling rate is very high.
예, 어쨌든 그
Yes.
아마도 이 분야 자체가 오래되긴 했지만 그 관리적 측면에서는
So
계속 새로운 기술이 나오고
in
있기
terms
때문에
of management, a lot of operations, a lot of technologies are being introduced. So I think that we have a lots of options to explore. Is there any other question from the floor?
친환경 소재 관련해서
Regarding the eco materials, I read many articles, but it's actually canapé as a material is something that is not very familiar to me. So, Kevin, why did you use canap as out of all different, plant-based materials?
Right. I think part of sustainable design is also to see what you have around the surroundings and then the region. So you can't say, I would like to use something which is available in the United States when you're in Asia versus vice versa, right? So because we are always in that society where we can import and export materials so easily, but we have to ask ourselves what is around us, what can we use? Can we look towards nature for certain inspiration? So I think the first milestone that we want to make is that let's look around us and see what is around us in that region. So canna fiber is available in parts of Southeast Asia, especially in the lower parts of south of India, Malaysia. It's also grown in China and Japan and parts of, I think, South Asia per se. And that is also a bit different from the American counterpart, which is from hemp. And we have to look at these materials and see how we can use them for our various purposes per se. So, for example, if we talk about other plant fibers as well, which can be made into biocomposites, we also can look at, as I said, at food waste. So in the whole production of, let's say, pineapples and all that, there's a lot of biomass or materials that are being thrown away. Can we begin to use them for other purposes as well, right? Can they slowly begin to replace plastics and other synthetics?
뭐 어쨌든 이 재료에 대한 이야기들
Yes,
정말
you talked about
재미있었고요.
the materials,
아무래도 이제
and
지역성이라는 게 이제
your
포함되어 있는데 좀
presentation was
요거하고 좀
very
비슷한
interesting,
사례가
and you talked
하나
about
들려드리면
locality.
홍콩에서는
I would like to give you a similar
스캐폴딩이라고 하는
example.
건물을 지을
When it
때
comes to
건물을
scaffolding
둘러싸는
for
그
architecture,
구조체를 대나무로 만들고 있어요.
they are
이게 굉장히
using
역사도 오래됐고요.
bamboo
지금
trees,
현재도
and
그렇게 활용하고
it
있어요.
goes back
그런
a
점에서
long
봤을
way
때
in terms of
사실
history.
건축의 재료 부분은 어떻게 보면 우리가 이제 사실
So
오늘의
when it comes to the
핵심적인
materials used
바이오필릭
for
실천이라고
architecture,
하면
I think
우리의
it should be
next
very much
generation
aligned to
기술은
biophilic design,
사실
which is
어떻게
the
보면
topic
에이션트
of this session.
퓨처라고 할 수 있으니까 이미
This is
우리가
the next
이전에
feature.
갖고 있던 무언가에
It's something
답이
that's
있을 수도 있다는
been
생각이 좀
around
드는데
us
사실 그 케빈님
forever, but as Kevin mentioned,
이렇게 개발하시고
it's about
이렇게 이제 하는 과정들을
researching,
보면 그런
and it's
부분들이
about
좀 가슴에 많이
identifying
와닿는 것
what
같습니다.
materials to use.
질문 하나
So
정도만
it
더
really
받고
resonated
오늘
with me.
강의 마무리하려고
Maybe can we entertain one more question? Does anybody have any questions?
네, 발표 잘 들었습니다.
Yes, thank you very
혹시
much for
지속 가능한
that
공간의
presentation.
창출을
About
바탕으로
sustainable
오피스에 적용된
space,
사례나 적용한 사례를
any application
어떤
cases
것이
for office buildings or office
이게
spaces?
사실 이제 좀 오늘 케빈님 같은 경우에는 좀 건축가이지만
So as for Kevin, he's an architect, but he's also a researcher of materials. As for Kim Jongkyu, he's an expert on energy.
사실 제가 아마 오늘 이 자리에 있는 가장 큰 이유 중에 하나는
And I think the reason I'm here moderating the session is because
온드림 소사이어티를 이제
I actually created the On-Dream Society funded by the 정몽구 Foundation. It's in Myeongdong.
친환경적인 공간이라고 말하기
And
좀
I
애매할
cannot
수도
say that
있지만
space is like the most
그
sustainable
공간을 만들
space
때
out there.
어떻게 보면
But when we
그런
created
부분을
that
많이 신경을
space,
썼어요. 근데
we
이제
took into
바이오필릭이라고
consideration a
하는
lot of
단어는
things.
어떻게 보면
And
아까 말했던
biophilic,
에이션트 퓨처랑
the
가장
concept
유사합니다.
is very much
그냥,
similar to the ancient future concept I
공간에
talked
사용하는
about.
사람과
So there is the person
자연과
using the space, and there is
환경과 모든 게 다
nature and
일체화돼 있어요.
environment.
그러니까
All
뭐
of that is
에너지만
integrated,
뭐
meaning
세이브해서도 안
that
되고
we don't only have to save energy.
사람만 편해서도 안 되고
No,
그
we should not
모든 게
only
이제
seek
우리가 소위
comfort
말하는
for
저희는
human
원래
beings.
원시시대 때 다
I mean,
생태계로
during the
그냥
primitive
자연에
years, we were
노출돼
all
있던
out there
사람들인데
exposed to the wild
요즘
in the
문명화를
ecosystem.
이루면서
But with the
콘크리트 덩어리
development of
안에서
civilization, we have come to come
요즘에는 다시
inside
캠핑한다고
the
다시
boundaries of
자연으로 많이 나가고
concrete,
있는데
and nowadays people
이게
like to go out camping again.
워킹하는
But
그 시간이 적지가 않습니다, 여러분.
we spend a lot of time
그 시간
working,
동안 어떻게
and
여기는
it took
이제
us a lot of
스트레스
time to
일 수도
be
있을
here.
것이고요.
And
그리고
when
이제
you're out there
에너지 효율도 분명히
working,
있을 것이고.
your stress level
사례를 하나
goes up.
들어드리면
And there's also a matter of
그
energy
미국
efficiency.
같은
Let me
경우에는
give you an
리드
example.
골드를
In the
따기
United
위해서는
States, in order to be
이렇게
certified
전등이
LEED
있잖아요.
and gold,
이게 자기가
all of
있는
these
자리에서 일을 하지
lamps
않으면 전등이 더 꺼져야 돼요.
should
그게
go
영구 조건이에요.
off if you're not actually
두
working.
번째로 또 이런
All the
바이오필리아의
lamps
가장
above you
좋은 사례
should
중에 하나는
be turned off.
여러분 잘
And
아시는 아마존
one
헤드쿼터.
example of biophilic
거기에
practice is the Amazon head
진짜 회사
office.
이름처럼 아마존을
Just
만드셨어요.
like
이렇게 큰 돔.
The name Amazon,
그래서 그
they
안에
actually made
들어가면
an
거의
Amazon
원초적인
forest there,
느낌들이
like a
드는데
dome. And if
회사의
you go
모든
inside,
느낌이
everything looks
그
very
안에 있어요.
primitive, and
그만큼
all the
일하는
meeting rooms at
환경이라든지
Amazon are inside that
사람이
dome.
움직이는
So
환경에
where
자연이라는
people
것은
are
굉장히 중요한
working and where
소재이고
people are moving,
그것으로부터 사람이
the
안정감을
concept
얻는
of
데서
nature
오는
is very
일의
important.
효율성도
And
어떻게 보면
we can take a lot of
모든
comfort from nature, and we
탄소와
can
다
boost our
연관이 되어 있다고
productivity, and all of that is also
생각이
related
됩니다.
with carbon and
그래서
carbon
이렇게
emissions.
오늘 마지막 질문 감사하고
So thank you very much for that last question. And I think that I am now going to bring this session to a close. Thank you very much, Kevin, for coming from afar from Singapore. I know that you went to New York last week, but thank you for being here despite your busy schedule. And I would like to also thank ZER01 and also Mr. Kim. Thank you very much.
네, 저희 다양한
Thank you very
차원에서
much.
지속 가능한 도시, 지속 가능한 공간에
We talked about
대해서
sustainable
말씀
cities and
나눠주신
sustainable
김종규
space. And
대표님,
thank you very much,
그리고
Mr. Kim Jongkyu.
크리에이터님, 그리고
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin
박상욱님께
Lim.
감사하다는
And thank you very
말씀
much,
다시
Mr.
드리고요.
Park
저희
Sangwook
제로원의 행보
for the
그리고
session.
앞으로
And
글로벌에서
please
활약하게 될
keep
저희 글로벌
stay tuned
크리에이터분들에게도
for
많은 관심
our future
가져주시면
activities at
감사하겠습니다.
ZER01. Thank you very much.